Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday English Channel with Tom and Kate. We're really happy to have you with us today.
Yes, thanks for being here again. It's always nice to take a moment, sit down, and just talk. So, how are you today?
I'm feeling good. Quite focused, actually. It's been a productive day so far. I woke up early, followed my routine, and everything went as planned. And you?
I'm already smiling because my answer is very different. My day started slowly. I didn't wake up early, I didn't follow a plan, and I definitely didn't feel productive in the morning.
That doesn't surprise me. You've never been a morning person.
That's true. I really try sometimes, but I usually wake up, check my phone, stay in bed a bit longer, and suddenly I'm already late.
That's exactly why I like having a structured morning. I wake up at the same time every day, around 6:30. No phone, no distractions. I just get up, drink some water, and start my day.
6:30. That sounds very early to me. I think if I wake up at that time, I need at least 20 minutes just to understand where I am.
That's interesting, because for me, waking up early actually makes the day easier. I have time to do things properly. I can take a shower, have breakfast, maybe even plan my day.
See, that's the difference. You plan your day. I just enter the day and see what happens.
And how does that work for you?
Honestly, sometimes it's fine, and sometimes it's stressful. If I wake up late, I skip breakfast, I rush, and I start the day already tired.
That's exactly what I try to avoid. For me, the morning sets the tone for the whole day.
Yes, I understand that, and I think a lot of people feel the same way, but at the same time, not everyone can follow a strict routine.
That's true. And the interesting part is how people talk about these routines in English. Most of the time, they don't give a detailed description. They just mention a few key things.
Yes, like, I woke up early, or I got up late, or I didn't sleep well.
And even those sentences can be shorter in real conversations. People might say, woke up early, or didn't sleep much, or got up late.
I use those short versions all the time, especially in the morning when I don't have the energy for full sentences.
That's actually very natural. Spoken English is often shorter and more direct.
After waking up, people usually mention a couple of actions. Things like, I had a coffee, I took a shower, or I got ready quickly.
In my case, it's often, I had coffee and ran out of the house.
That sounds stressful.
It is, but it's also very real for many people. Not everyone has a calm, perfect morning routine.
That's true. And that's why it's interesting to hear different ways of describing the same moment.
Yes, because even if our routines are different, the language stays simple.
After the morning, people usually talk about going to work.
Yes, and again, the sentences are very direct. I went to work, I started at 9, or I worked from home.
I say, I worked from home quite often, especially when I don't want to leave the house.
And how does your workday usually go?
It depends. Some days are busy, some days are slower. I usually say something like, it was busy, or it was a long day.
That's very typical.
And you?
I would say my days are structured. I have tasks, meetings, and clear objectives. So I often describe my day with sentences like, I had a lot of meetings, or I worked on a project.
That sounds very organized.
It is, but again, the language used to describe it is simple.
Yes, and that's an important point. People don't describe every detail of their day.
They summarize.
Exactly. They give a general idea, and then the conversation continues.
And I think that's something learners should remember. You don't need to explain everything.
You just need to share a few key moments, and that's enough to create a natural conversation.
So after the morning, the next interesting moment in the day is usually the middle of the day, around lunchtime. And this is another point where people's routines can be very different. For me, lunch is something I always plan. I usually eat at the same time, around 12:30. I try to keep it simple but balanced, nothing too heavy, so I can stay focused in the afternoon.
I wish I could say the same. My lunch really depends on the day. Sometimes I eat at 12, sometimes at 2, and sometimes I just forget.
You forget to eat?
Not completely, but I delay it. I'm doing something, I tell myself. I'll eat in a few minutes, and suddenly it's very late.
That sounds like something that can affect your energy during the day.
It does. Some afternoons I feel tired, and I know it's because I didn't eat properly. But at the same time, I like the flexibility. I don't feel restricted.
That's interesting, because for me, having a routine removes stress. I don't need to think about when to eat or what to do. It's already decided.
Yes, but that also means you follow the same pattern every day.
That's true, but I see it as something positive. It creates stability.
I understand that. And again, when people talk about lunch in English, they don't describe everything in detail. They usually keep it very simple.
Yes, you'll often hear sentences like, I had lunch around 1, or I grabbed something quickly, or I ate at my desk.
I use I grabbed something quite often, especially when I don't have time to sit down properly.
And that's a very natural expression.
Another thing people mention is where they eat.
Yes, like I ate at home, I went out for lunch, or I had lunch with a colleague.
These small details are enough to create a picture of the situation.
And sometimes people add a short comment about the experience. I had lunch with a colleague. It was nice. I ate quickly. It was a bit rushed.
These short additions make the conversation feel more real.
After lunch, people usually talk about the rest of their workday.
Yes, and again, they don't go into long explanations. They might say, the afternoon was busy, or it was quite calm, or I had a lot to do.
In my case, I often say, the afternoon went fast, especially when I don't really notice the time passing.
That's a good expression. It shows how you experienced the moment, not just what you did.
And that's something important. When people talk about their day, they often describe how it felt, not just what happened.
Yes, and that's why simple adjectives are very useful. Words like busy, long, easy, quiet.
They are simple, but they carry a lot of meaning.
Another thing that happens in conversations is that people sometimes compare their day to other days.
Yes, like, today was busier than usual, or it was calmer than yesterday.
These comparisons are very common and easy to use, and they make the conversation more dynamic.
Something else that comes up quite often is talking about small habits during the day.
Yes, those little things that are not essential, but part of your routine.
For me, one important habit is taking short breaks. I usually step away from my desk for a few minutes, have some water, and reset.
I try to do that, but I'm not very consistent. Sometimes I take breaks, sometimes I don't even realize how long I've been working.
That's the difference between having a structured routine and a more flexible one.
Yes, but I think many people recognize themselves more in my situation.
Probably. And that's why it's interesting to talk about both approaches.
Another small habit people often mention is drinking coffee.
Yes, that's almost universal.
You'll hear things like, I had another coffee in the afternoon, or I needed coffee to stay awake.
I say that a lot, especially on busy days.
And again, these are small details, but they make conversations more natural.
They show real life, not just actions.
Exactly. And when you combine all these small elements, you get a clear picture of someone's day.
Without needing long explanations.
Just a few simple sentences connected naturally.
After the afternoon, the next part of the day people often talk about is the evening, and this is usually where routines become even more personal. Some people have very structured evenings, while others prefer to relax and do things depending on how they feel.
That's where I feel much more comfortable, to be honest. My evenings are not planned at all. I finish work, and then I just see what I feel like doing. Sometimes I cook, sometimes I order food, sometimes I just sit on the sofa and watch something without really thinking.
That sounds very flexible, but also a bit unpredictable.
It is. But I like that feeling. After a structured day at work, I don't want another strict schedule in the evening.
I understand that. In my case, the evening is also structured, but in a different way than the morning. I don't plan everything in detail, but I usually follow the same pattern. I finish work, I take a short break, then I prepare dinner, and after that I have some quiet time.
When you say quiet time, what do you mean?
It can be reading, sometimes reviewing my day, or just sitting without distractions. I try to avoid screens for a while.
That's very disciplined. I usually do the opposite. I go directly to my phone or turn on something to watch.
And how do you feel after that?
Honestly, sometimes relaxed, but sometimes a bit tired without really knowing why.
That's interesting because many people describe the same feeling.
Yes, and when people talk about their evening in English, they usually keep it simple. They say things like, I got home around 6, or I made dinner, or I watched a movie.
I use I watched something a lot because I don't always know how to describe what I watched.
That's very natural. People often stay general.
Another common sentence is, I just relaxed.
Yes, that one is everywhere.
It doesn't explain exactly what you did, but it gives a clear idea.
And that's enough in most conversations.
Something else people often mention is how tired they feel in the evening.
Yes, like, I was really tired, or I was exhausted, or I had no energy.
In my case, I often say, I was tired, so I didn't do much.
That's a very common structure. You explain your condition, and then your action.
Another interesting point is how people talk about habits in the evening.
Yes, small habits that repeat every day.
For me, one habit is preparing things for the next day. I organize what I need, I check my schedule, and I try to reduce stress for the morning.
That sounds very efficient.
It is. It makes the next day easier.
I don't do that at all. I usually think about the next day, the next morning.
That probably creates more pressure.
It does, especially when I'm already late.
This shows how different routines can be, even if the language used to describe them stays simple.
Yes, and that's the key point. You don't need complex sentences to talk about your habits. You can say things like, I prepare for the next day, or I don't plan anything, or I just go with the flow.
Go with the flow is a nice expression.
Yes, and it describes my evenings very well.
Another thing people often mention is going to bed.
Yes, that's usually how they finish describing their day.
You'll hear things like, I went to bed early, or I stayed up late, or I couldn't sleep.
I say, I stayed up late quite often.
And I usually say, I went to bed at the same time.
That's consistent with your routine.
Yes, I try to keep a regular schedule.
And again, when people talk about these moments, they don't go into long explanations. They just give a simple summary.
A few key actions, a few feelings, and that's enough.
And that's what makes the conversation natural.
Something that happens very naturally in conversations is that people don't always describe their day step by step. Instead, they often give a quick summary and then add details if needed. For instance, someone might simply say, "It was a long day," or "It was a good day," and leave it there.
Yes, I do that a lot. If someone asks me about my day, I don't start from the morning. I usually say something like, "It was fine," or "It was a bit chaotic," and then I wait to see if the other person wants more details.
That's very common. And if the other person is interested, they might ask something like, "Why?" or "What happened?"
Exactly. And then I add a bit more. Maybe I say, "I woke up late, I had to rush, and everything felt a bit messy."
That's a very natural way to build a conversation.
And it's much easier than trying to explain everything from the beginning.
Another thing people do quite often is focus on one specific moment of the day. Instead of describing the whole routine, they talk about one thing that was important or different.
Yes, like, "The morning was difficult," or "The afternoon was really busy," or "The evening was relaxing." These kinds of sentences help structure the story without making it complicated.
In my case, I might say something like, "The morning was great, but the afternoon was a bit stressful."
And I would probably say something like, "The morning was a disaster, but the rest of the day was okay."
That shows how different experiences can be, even if the structure of the sentence is very simple.
Another useful way people talk about their routine is by comparing days.
Yes, I do that sometimes. I say things like, "Today was better than yesterday," or "This week is busier than usual."
These comparisons are very easy to use and make the conversation more interesting.
They also help express how you feel about your routine.
Something else that happens naturally is that people don't always describe actions. They describe habits.
Yes, that's true. Instead of saying what they did one specific day, they say what they usually do.
Like, "I usually wake up early," or "I normally skip breakfast," or "I often work late."
These sentences are very useful because they allow you to talk about your routine in general.
And they are very simple to build.
Another interesting pattern is when people mix routine and exception.
Yes, like, "I usually wake up early, but today I stayed in bed."
That's a very natural way to speak.
It shows your normal routine, and then something different.
And that makes the conversation more dynamic.
Something else I notice is that people often use small connectors to link their ideas.
Yes, words like then, after that, later, or in the evening.
These words help organize the story without making it complicated.
And they are easy to use.
Another thing that makes conversations sound natural is adding small personal comments.
Yes, like, "I was really tired," or "I felt good," or "I didn't have much energy."
These details make the routine more human.
Because it's not just about actions, it's also about how you experience them.
And that's what makes people connect when they talk.
When you put all these elements together, something becomes clear. You don't need complex grammar to talk about your day.
You need simple sentences connected naturally with a few personal details.
And that's enough to create a real conversation.
So if you want to practice speaking about your routine, you can keep it very simple. Start with a general sentence, add one or two details, and then let the conversation continue. That's all you need.
Before we finish, thank you very much for spending this time with us today.
We hope this episode helps you feel more comfortable talking about your daily routine in English.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, or share it with someone who is learning English.
It really helps us grow, and we truly appreciate your support.
Join us in the next episode for another calm and practical English conversation.
Thanks again for listening.
And remember, keep speaking English every day.